science fiction. We make no guarantees, however, how long it will remain fiction. Fiction. Fiction.
Astral surveillance salutations, all you cognonauts out there, and welcome to Exofathom, the show that dares to explore the outside reaches of understanding. I am your host, Nick, and I am joined by my two lovely co-hosts, as always. Ayla, how are you?
Ooh, I'm doing okay today. Astro projection, something to you too.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
I just like the emphasis at the beginning. I was like, where is he going with that?
I literally made it up on the spot. I totally forgot that I didn't have a salutation. So
that always gets me.
That was my thinking process. That long pause was not dramatic. It was just me thinking.
That was 10 out of 10. I didn't even notice it. So you
appreciate it. Thank you.
I was completely engrossed in the moment. It was great.
Wonderful. I'm glad. Well, we got Mike here. How you doing, man?
Oh, I'm doing all right, man. Do you see my my astro projection just hanging out in the corner of the room?
Yes. Well, I'm currently in a closet, so you are in the little corner there. Yeah.
I'm always in the closet, so.
Well, thank you so much, you guys, for joining us this evening. We hope to have a wonderful episode for you tonight, full of twists and turns and speculation and craziness. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a declassified CIA document about a Stanford Research Institute experiment about, that's a lot of abouts, remote viewing on the planet Jupiter. And before I get into the introductory, because I'm going to have to go through this a little bit for you guys to give you a little bit of a background on what was taking place during this time. If you could astral project, I think we might have even had this question before, so maybe I can't even ask it. I was going to say, if you could astral project anywhere, where would it be? But I think we've had this question before. Have I asked you guys this before? Am I just losing my mind?
Maybe in a fifth dimension somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to be lazy and say, if you could astral project anywhere, where would it be?
And if it's the same answer, we'll know you weren't lying last time.
That's right.
Uh-oh.
That's right.
Oh, pressure.
I guess for me, I would like to project onto Saturn, so I could see the rings from the planet itself. Pretty cool.
That would be very cool.
Mm-hmm. I'm obsessed with Saturn.
Because of the rings?
It's because I saw it from a telescope one day, and it was just I'm such a dork. I don't want to get too far into this, but I saw this foreign planet with it legit, like you look at it's like a star with a little ring around it, and you hear this and you see pictures, but I think when you see it for yourself, it's so cool. Like, it's so foreign, and it's out there, and it's just like, what else is out there that we've thought of and just not like proven yet? It's just such a cool thing.
Yeah, Saturn is one of the original gods as well, so maybe there's a little bit.
I got in trouble because of Saturn at Astro Camp, so you're in the right place for dorks. So we're okay.
Well, and I went to Astro Camp as well, so that's kind of hilarious, weird connection there.
Yeah, it was a cool place. It's
like
we're all part of the same CIA experiment or something.
I don't know.
Maybe.
Our school won like a little contest, and then we all got to go. But we were from the inner city.
The government called and said, "Congratulations, 30 of your children have won a contest to participate in an experiment."
Oh man, no! Don't get me started, because quarantine's making me a little weird. So I'm highly suggestible. Just got to calm down on that.
Nothing to do with that test your child took like 6 months ago.
Yeah, right. The aptitude test that you never got the results for.
Oh my God. Huh? Okay. Mine. Well, no, because anyway, it's a long story, but
I think we just scared her.
Yeah. Well, one day when we have a paywall, I think our listeners will get to hear some of the hilarious exchanges that we have after our shows. But yeah, I had this passing thought today, and I was like, oh, that's terrifying if that were true, which very well could be, but no, just kidding.
No, it's fair. I mean, I went through a series of tests as a child too, like academic tests to place me in a cognitive spectrum, or like in a range of like, there's like getting labeled gifted, and then I got into like a GATE program, and the gateway thing. I feel you. I understand.
Yeah. Well, and like similar. And then to add to that, there were always a lot of graduate students testing things on us. Like we had internet access obscenely early as a test, and we had this like weird experimental educational program multiple times. So I don't know. It's just like thinking back on it, I don't know if that's normal, like for nearby universities to test out stuff on youth, but
well, meanwhile the CIA looked at my test and was like, you go play kickball. You'll be much happier.
Don't worry, Nick, they were watching you from across the street. This kid's way too aware of everything. We just got to be able to just keep our distance. No, I had a psychologist follow me.
Right, yeah. The psychologist is probably more likely.
I never got a book that she was supposedly writing for her dissertation.
Oh, okay.
Right, the weird stuff. But also, what does it say about us that we're all like, I'm in the cool club if I suspect having some sort of like CIA observation?
That we're all narcissists with borderline personality disorders.
Thanks.
Look, I just want validation as an asset, okay? That's all I want.
My mind is special, damn it.
Yeah.
No, but like legit, I think I actually tried out for the I tried to apply for the CIA, and like it was like a job fair. They wouldn't even give me an application. They were like, we don't have any use for your degrees.
Yeah, that's what the Air Force said.
Ditto, them too. Yeah. Screw them. No, I mean,
it's all good. I mean, the only reason I would want to join the Air Force is to be a part of one of these programs that we're going to be talking about today. And
I just want to fly stuff. Shoot.
Well, yeah, there's very rigid specifications for flying, so I would have never made that anyways.
Yeah, flying's not as fun as you think it is anyway. It's just like,
yeah, you got to imagine how sick you would get like your first time flying an F-16. Oh my God.
It's so fun though. You'd have to do like halo jumps and like, I don't know. I wanted to fly like jets, but then I was like, where are these jets going to go to? So I'm okay with my life journey. Okay.
Right. I always wanted to do halo. Halo jump is still on my life journey. I'll be like 80 and probably have a heart attack while I'm jumping.
Good way to go.
It'll be worth it.
It'll be worth it.
But to answer Nick's original question about astral projection, I had a modified answer last time, so I'm going to stick to that modified answer and just say I want to just astral project into a black hole. And just
oh yes, that's right. I remember.
Yeah,
that would be pretty cool. I'd be down for that.
I dig it.
Yeah, be right. I guess like even inside the event horizon, like right at the core of it, and just see what's going on.
Right before your body tears apart. That sounds good.
Stringifies and gets shot out into some other universe or some other form.
Although, I do think it'd be, I think we discussed this after. It's a little bit morbid, but I was thinking about the spaghettification principle and how like technically, if everything's still connected, just simply elongated, could you still be conscious? And like at what point would you lose consciousness in that scenario is an interesting thing to ponder.
Well, it sounds like they should have had these astral projectors go right into a black hole.
Yeah, why didn't they?
What if it tears your consciousness apart, though?
Ooh, that'd be kind of cool. Yeah. What if you feel like Hodor in Game of Thrones? Like you go through a black hole in astral projection, and then you
That's exactly what happened to Hodor.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
So
and then you get
sad.
told to hold doors, and that's all you can say for the rest of your life. But since we're a little bit loose and wild, I wanted to get into a very speculative document that was released in the big CIA dump and declass of 2013. No, this was approved for release in 01 or 08. Sorry. And this particular document details a conversation between three men about a mission to astral project onto the planet Jupiter. Now, the three men involved are, and as follows, a Harold Sherman, an Inigo Swan, and a Hal Puthoff. And so I wanted to get into these guys real quick because it's kind of important to know who they are before we talk about their conversation and their remote viewing. So Hal Puthoff is the guy that created this experiment. And the experiment is entitled An Experimental Psychic Probe of the Planet Jupiter. And Hal Puthoff, I'm going to mispronounce his name forever, I think. But he is actually the director of Institute for Advanced Studies at Austin. But he also worked at the Stanford Research Institute back in the 70s and 80s, particularly called SRI. And he is a parapsychologist and a researcher in parapsychology. And actually, one of the first selected publications of Puthoff is part of this sort of experiment that he did. It was in 1975, and it was on remote viewing of natural targets. And it was a research in parapsychology in 1974. This experiment took place 1 year prior in April 27th of 1973. So it stands to reason that this particular experiment was probably a part of this publication that he published a year later concerning parapsychology and also just the topic of remote viewing. So this guy, Hal Puthoff, he's kind of like this researcher, very respected. He's got a great resume. And he's been working with NASA. He's been working on propulsion physics initiatives. He was a chairman of science and advisory board of Bigelow Aerospace. So this guy's like a big deal. And what he decided to do, and I don't know if this is one of his first experiments or perhaps he had a longer career before this, but apparently in 1973, he decided to get two men together who claimed to be psychics and remote viewers. And he decided that he was going to get these two men together and perform experiments and have them remote view objects to see if there's any similarities between their reports, probably in an effort to figure out whether there's any validity in this idea of remote viewing. Having, two people look at the same thing and not interact with each other, but give similar information was probably ideally the desired outcome of these experiments in an effort to kind of validify, maybe even drive funding to the research of remote viewing. Because especially back in the day and in the Cold War, there was a lot of concern about whether Russia was dabbling in this sort of parapsychology or occult knowledge within their military. The concept of the psychic soldier was something that was a fear that the Russians were developing, which, funny enough, was apparently a psyop the entire time. It was an effort to make the Soviets spend more money than they should have, which I didn't know. So this whole like Cold War craze of like the super soldier and like the parapsychology and like all this occult stuff was actually sort of like a drive from the U.S. to get the Soviet Union to spend more money on research to bankrupt the country. Yeah, which I thought was a pretty ingenious way to get your enemy to just bankrupt itself.
No Star Wars defense.
Yeah.
I don't know, but yeah, it runs along the same lines of the Star Wars defense.
Yeah, absolutely. Like get them to work on some sort of pie in the sky experimentation in order to drain their resources. And so there's probably a little bit of that in there. But as I was talking to Mike earlier and before the show, like there has to be a little bit of something going on. Now, perhaps the government is just using this to waste money or whatever. I don't know. But it seems as though these research and experiments into remote viewing have been going on for at least a few decades. So far, we only can get declassified documents from the 70s, but we've had documents from the 50s and even just a little bit before in the late 40s talking about experiments into remote viewing. So we know that the government's been doing this for quite some time. And this particular session, if you will, I found pretty interesting because this session takes place in 1973 and in April specifically, which is just a few months before the Pioneer 10 probe was launched into space. And the Pioneer 10 probe was actually one of our first probes that we got past the asteroid belt and in the vicinity of Jupiter. And it was actually one of the first probes to ever take close-up shots of Jupiter. So prior to this probe launching, we had really no knowledge of what we might see when we got closer to Jupiter. Now, we could see it through telescopes. We could, use math to kind of determine sizes. And, even as early as the 1600s, they knew that Jupiter had the big red dot on it. And that was through telescopes and just observation of light displacement over time. I believe that was Copernicus who came up with that. But yeah, so this Pioneer probe was going to kind of pave the way to see the outer solar system, or at least the farther away solar system, because at the time we had really only gone to about Mars, and once you get past the asteroid belt, it was very hard for us to deal with monitoring anything farther than that. But as time progressed, so did our technology. We got the ability to send this probe out, and so the Pioneer 10 is on the way to Jupiter as this experiment is being done, which we will find useful later when we talk about some of the similarities and some of the things that they actually got correctly from their remote viewing experience, and things that we had not known before, and some things that hadn't been confirmed until 30 years later. So without much further ado, I want to get into the document. And the introduction here is by Hal Puthoff, and he talks about basically how this is going to be set up. And then we're going to get into the descriptions of each of the gentlemen, Mr. Swan and Mr. Sherman, the descriptions of their remote viewing sessions. And then we're going to go over the similarities. And then we'll talk about the things that they predicted that actually came true once we found out a little bit more. So the introduction is the Sherman-Swan psychic probe of the planet Jupiter. And I'll bring this back up on the screen so you guys can read it with us. And the introduction is as follows. As a result of the conversation between Mr. Harold Sherman of Mountain View, Arkansas, and Mr. Inigo Swan of New York, New York, and in an attempt to carry forward the possible verity of psychic nature of men, it was decided to hold a psychic probe of the planet Jupiter. As with any experiment, the necessity of feedback potential must characterize any experimental work undertaken with the is that psychical? It is psychical. Or is it physical? No, that's psychical. Psychical nature of men. While the probing by other than physical means of far distant planets seem extraordinary, it was noted that the Jupiter bypass NASA space module Pioneer 10 was on its way and hopefully will relay back data as yet not known to science. Goes on to say that based on this situation, it was decided to probe psychically the planet Jupiter. In the event of April 27th, 1973, therefore, Mr. Sherman arranged to begin his probe at 8 p.m. Central Time, and Mr. Swan, currently on the West Coast, at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. The psychics probed thus took place simultaneously. After 1/2 hour, Mr. Sherman was reached by telephone by Mr. Swan, and their results were compared. Certain salient points of the obvious similarities between the results of both men follow. The actual responses of both men were recorded and are attached as an annex. And then it goes on to say, neither Mr. Sherman nor Mr. Swan claimed validity for their results, since to do so would be beside any scientific point. What verification might come from Pioneer 10 remains to be seen. So a little bit of a disclaimer there at the end about this not necessarily being a scientific approach, but perhaps an esoteric approach to psychically visualize Jupiter. And then basically the program goes on to say, and these are the similarities. I'm going to bring this back after we go through the account of the remote viewing, so that way we have a reference point, because for some reason they put the similarities at the front, which I guess is good for a military report, but for a storytelling point of view, we want to get the similarities after we hear the story of the remote viewing session. So the first person to basically give their account of the remote viewing is going to be Mr. Harold Sherman. And I have Ayla here that she's going to help me read this, because I get very, very, very heavy breathed when I have to read for very long. So she's going to help me out.
Here's hoping I do a good job. Should I just start?
Yeah, go ahead and start. So this is basically Harold Sherman on the phone with Inigo Swan and Hal Puthoff after they had their remote viewing sessions. And this is what they are doing to compare notes on what they both saw separately. Keep in mind that they're states apart and they didn't have any prior communication to this. And the person facilitating this is Hal Puthoff, and he is trying to see if there are similarities between these two accounts.
Perfect. All right, here I go. I have written, quote, Wait, was I not supposed to try to?
I mean,
no, I'm kidding.
I don't think you have to do it dramatically. But...
no, do it dramatically. It's amazing. Hold on, but
yeah.
Hey, Nick, could you close that bottom bar?
Oh, yes,
downloads?
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
The OCD side of me is going insane. Thank you.
You got
it. I'm dying inside, man.
Yes.
Okay, I will not try to lower or deepen my voice because that hurts. Okay, I have written, quote, "It is now 8 Central Standard Time, and I am sitting in my special concentration room in the little house where Inigo Swan stayed when he visited us some weeks ago. As I prepare to direct my consciousness to the attempted probe of Jupiter, its occurrences and conditions relative thereto, I am immediately and associately sucked into total contact with the speeding space module Pioneer 10. And I can clearly see that it is at present traveling on a definite collision course with one of the largest Jupiter moons. And unless this course is ultimately altered, it will most certainly crash into it and end this investigative journey. Now I am carried...
Sorry, just to interject there, for reference, because I did look it up. The Pioneer did not crash into a moon on Jupiter, and it made it past the Kuiper Belt. So that's already one ding for this guy. Just wanted to say.
Just this. I feel like we need some sort of like bell or something, like no.
Right, you're right.
He continues. Now I am carried ahead of it and am approaching the Jupiter moon itself. It seems larger than Earth, a great shiny revolving ball surrounded by a gigantic swirl of gases, giving off a golden glow and crystal-like diamond sparkles of unbelievable inner sight. I am still some distance from Jupiter, which I can see to the right of this moon. Far, far away, 1,000,000, I can't tell, perhaps more. Anyway, a great many miles distant, and with an almost eye-blinding brilliance that is radiating. I'm sure that physical eyesight could not stand what I am perceiving inwardly. I seem to be a speck, a particle, somehow free of the gravitational pull which is affecting everything around me. I am able to see in all directions as I mentally look around. It is as though I am looking through a scope, seeing all this in miniature and suddenly magnified into a normal size. The sensation comes and goes. These visions are inside me, then outside. There is a yellow cast to space and seeming dark objects show through it. Can they be other moons of contrasting colors or densities? The impressions come to me that are 17, some yet undiscovered by Earth scientists, much closer to Jupiter. And the feeling also comes that some of them have been and are being spawned by the convulsive volcanic action in the interior of the gaseous masses of Jupiter, spun off into space in newly forming vortices, which start a revolution of their own, gathering inconceivable gaseous forces and electronic particles to them, which adhere to these newly created masses and ultimately solidify in the new moons. The feeling also comes that the sun originally, an unthinkably huge gaseous mass, in a mighty explosion threw off vast gaseous balls which began the planets we recognize today, including Jupiter. I'm sorry. You just
So many
gas a
gaseous.
lot.
There's a lot of gaseous in there.
Did he really? I'm
Maybe
so
he had
sorry.
to fart while he was astral projecting.
No. I was trying. You heard me. I was
It's
trying.
okay. I know.
Okay,
No,
I'll give it up.
I noticed.
Thank you. Onward. All ultimately achieving a gravitational balance in time and place. And in the process of gathering their own forces, these gaseous balls exploded in themselves and cast off parts of themselves in the forms of moons and satellites, holding to them as parents hold their children, their umbilical cords, the magnetic attraction between them. I'm tired tonight. Exhausting experience. I am now being shown many asteroids or very thick, dark planets between Mars and Jupiter, some with
Redacted.
life forms, lesser or equivalent to ours. Did you want to take a pause there?
Oh yeah, well, it just said that something is redacted in that. So some redacted with life forms lesser or equivalent to ours.
Gotta
So
be
we
the
don't
gaseous moons, man.
something gaseous is
This way comes.
something gaseous is forming in between Mars and Jupiter.
Or
I
his
don't
butt.
see any redaction. It just looks like a giant space. Maybe there's just a lot of
It's a
space.
giant space, yes.
I thought he was being dramatic. Thus, my dramatic reading.
Oh, maybe.
Taking liberties with it. Yeah, who knows?
Protecting aliens over here. That's what we're doing.
Mhm.
Gaseous aliens.
Poor
okay.
aliens.
There's words coming up again. I'm gonna try. Okay, because I get the giggles really quickly. So, okay. I am given the feeling that where there are great gaseous areas, swirling vortices of increasing velocity, that these are new worlds in formation, and that an intelligence or directing force inconceivable to us is behind this incessant act of creation. Now I suddenly see projected to a point where I feel I can see Jupiter itself, a spectacle beyond description. It looks like it is bulged in the middle of its gigantic ball-like shape. It is a gaseous mass of myriad colors: yellow, red, ultraviolet, some greens, like a giant fireworks display. There must be many chemical elements involved beyond my understanding. A huge red mass is moving across the face of Jupiter from right to left, followed by a darker cloud of immense size. It is an elongation that stretches for miles and miles, a swirling mass as though generated and added to by eruptive magnetic and gaseous forces coming from the interior of Jupiter, which seems more liquid or vaporous than solid. Strange, I can see ice crystals. They are shimmering like trillions of silver needles, and I am wondering if they are not icy cold. They seem to be near the surface. I wish I could see through the enormous cloud cover, which must be miles deep. It billows and leaps with a changing vivid yellow and red and green incandescence, as though reflecting great magnetic fires from some redacted source. Now I suddenly seem to see through and catch light of a reddish-brown formation extending in a curved line as far as my mind's eye can see. Can it be Jupiter's Earth crust? It looks almost metallic, molten, and sparks red hot, great vapors seething through. Vapors. It gives me a dizzy sensation to look at it. I wonder if Ingo is getting anything like this or what form his impressions are taking. I don't know how close Pioneer 10 redacted is going to come to Jupiter in its bypass, but it looks like it will encounter powerful magnetic forces, winds of terrific velocity, and gaseous masses of possible poisonous and damaging nature. Many farts are. The atmosphere seems unusually dense on some levels and extremely rarefied in others. There appear to be huge volcanic peaks, great cones rising some miles in Aren area, and deep frozen looking crystal covered valleys. There must be water, probably mostly in solidified or vaporized form. I don't get any sensation of heat or cold, and I don't hear what I see. It's like a silent movie, but I feel that I am seeing and feeling deeply, and it is awesome. Alas, I suddenly feel tired, somewhat sapped of energy. I'm conscious of my body. I notice the back of my hands are bright red and flushed with blood. I have not observed this reaction before. I have to collect my senses. I have a strong, heavy sensation like waking up from a sleep with a faraway feeling. Martha is calling me. Redacted. Ingo is on the phone.
Ingo is on the phone. Nice. Well, thank you. That was Harold Sherman's account of his visit to Jupiter when he astral projected.
And the gases.
And the many gases. Apparently, he had to. he was very adamant about. Yes, very adamant about the gas. But I think that there's something valid to that. Being highlighted because. For as much as we knew about Jupiter, we didn't know the levels in which Jupiter's atmosphere was mostly gas. And we also certainly didn't know what the core of Jupiter was. We didn't understand whether there was going to be a crust there or there was going to be liquid. And what I will share with you guys in a little bit will be that they got a little bit of that correct as well. It'll be interesting. We'll let you guys know what they did get correct. But first, I wanted to give you Ingo's description of his session to Jupiter. And Ingo is a little bit more methodical. So he gave out like a whole like typed out transcript here of like almost minute by minute what he's seeing. And this is the transcript here on the screen.
That's amazing.
Yeah, he's very, he is
so much work.
It is. And he is very all about it. And so this is experiment 46, and it says Z exterior to space and time. Then key. Oh yeah.
I'm sorry.
Wait, are codes?
I'm reading ahead. I'm just seeing. I hope it's Jupiter.
Yeah.
The self-doubt.
I know, right?
Almost gives like, more credence to it.
Totally. It's like, I hope I didn't overshoot.
Yeah, right?
Oh, man, I'm at Neptune, you guys. Pull me back.
Oh, man, that's a planet yet to have been discovered. I swear it exists. I was there.
Hold on, dude. Let's not miss the gaseous joke and talk about Uranus. He might have
shot. That's true. There you go.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good. It's good. I appreciate it.
My question is, how do you see or sense all the gas? Like, okay, we were cooking yesterday, and I could have sworn that like there was a gas leak in the house. And I was telling Nick, he's like, well, you can't smell it. And I'm like, I swear I can smell it. And that's when I learned there's a difference between carbon monoxide and natural gas, right? That would have been what I was smelling, the natural gas.
Yeah. But there are some people that can pick up carbon monoxide.
And
It's
you can
very
also
rare.
Maybe I was
see,
a canary in another
but
life.
you can also see gas. You can see butane and methane and gas coming from your stove. If you are at the right angle, you can see the gas leave the burner.
Yeah.
Right. I just wonder, I mean, if I'm floating into some sort of space around a planet,
Hmm.
like how am I visualizing all this gas? And why am I speaking about it so frequently? Like, am I going through waves of gas or
Yeah.
is it just gas on gas?
Well, I mean, Jupiter's layers of gas. It's like layers of thick gas. So you would see it. It
True.
wouldn't be
You
like
wouldn't
a,
not see it that
yeah,
close. Okay.
yeah.
But
And
well,
if
I
you
mean, yeah.
and yeah, if you look at movements of Jupiter, it's like it's really beautiful. There's this one
Mhm.
here. Hold on. Show you guys on the
Well, he talks
screen.
about the swirling, and I know I've seen images of that, yeah, that
This is
corroborate
an
that.
image of Jupiter's gas
Gas?
layers. And if you're listening to the podcast, folks, it's these bands of Jupiter that go across its entirety. And it's just layers of gas that push against each other and move against each other and almost looks like stripes, but just stripes of gaseous material.
Yeah, it has to be. There has to be a lot of pressure there for those bands to form as
Right.
well. And I
That's
won't.
very true.
It might be a tactile response too, which is something we'll probably dive into later.
Mm,
But
mhm.
it could be a feel thing.
Could be. Yeah, he
Yeah,
does
yeah.
talk about, like, I don't what did he say? He's like, "I can't hear what I see," or something like that, which is interesting.
Yeah, he said it's like a silent movie, so you're almost just kind of like, and it would be too. I mean, like if you had your audio faculties and you were able to jump into Jupiter, you're not hearing anything. It's going to be such an enormous noise that you'll go deaf immediately. Like you wouldn't be able to go into a storm of Jupiter and not have your eardrums burst.
Crazy.
Also with the pressure too.
Yeah, the pressure certainly. Yeah.
Pressure.
And so this is Ingo, and he decided to be a little bit more methodical about his points here. So this is his tale of his 30 minutes on Jupiter astral projecting. And it's weird. I don't know what these little abbreviations or these things are, where it says like Z exterior space and time, Q aberrated theta perceptics, I inflow, and then Z is physical universe.
Redacted.
I have no idea what that means, but I want to look it up.
Looks like it's a mapping. So I means interior to space and time. Q means aberrated theta perceptics. I is inflow. Little Z would map to physical universe, and then my eye holes are bad, so I can't see the next one.
Yeah, it looks like a 2 maybe or something like that. But it starts as follows. This is 603. And he says that he's 3 seconds flat or fast. I mean, 3 seconds fast. He says that there's a planet with stripes. At 604, he says that he hopes it's Jupiter. And he says, I think that it must have an extremely large hydrogen mantle. If a space probe made contact with that, it would be maybe 80,000 to 120,000 miles out from the planet's surface. So I'm approaching it on the tangent where I can see that it's a half moon. In other words, half lit, half dark. If I move around to the lit side, it's distinctly yellow towards the right. Hal, which is the man that's running the experiment, says, which direction which direction you had to move? I don't know what that means, but he goes on to say, very high in the atmosphere, there are crystals. They glitter. Maybe the stripes are like bands of crystals, maybe like rings of Saturn, though not far out like that, very close within the atmosphere. I bet you they reflect radio probes. Is it possible that if you had a cloud of crystals that were assaulted by a different radio waves? And Hal says that's right. So I guess he's saying that once the Pioneer probe gets to Jupiter, if they bombard it with radio waves, they would be able to see if there are crystal clouds. So that's what he was asking. And he says, now I'll go down through. It feels really good there. And he laughs. I said that before, didn't I? Inside these cloud layers, those crystal layers, they look beautiful from the outside. From the inside, they look like rolling gas clouds, eerie yellow light, and rainbows. I get the impression, though I don't see, that it's liquid. Then I came through the cloud cover. The surface, it looked like sand dunes. They made of very large grade crystals, so they slide. Tremendous winds, sort of like maybe the prevailing winds of Earth, but very close to the surface of Jupiter. From that view, the horizon looks orangish and rose colored, but overhead it's kind of greenish yellow.
Hey, Nick,
Yes.
can you scroll up for those who are watching
Yes.
just to follow along?
Uh-huh. Yeah. And then it goes on to say, if I look to the right, there is an enormous mountain range. She says then, my papers here, if I'm giving a description of what I've gone or where I've gone and am, it would be approximately where Alaska is if the sun were directly overhead, which it is. The sun looks like it has a green corona, seems smaller to me. Hal asks, what color is the sun? And Ingo says white. I feel like there's liquid somewhere. Those mountains are very huge, but they still don't poke up through the crystal cloud cover. Sorry, guys. I feel, he said that. Okay. I had a dream once, something like this, where the cloud cover was a great arc, sweeps over the entire heaven. Those grains which make that sand orange are quite large. They have a polished surface, and they look something like amber or like obsidian, but they're yellowish and not as heavy. The wind blows them, and they slide along. If I turn, the whole thing seems enormously flat. I mean, if I get the feeling that if a man stood on those sands, I think he would sink into them. Maybe that's where the liquid feeling is coming from. I see something that looks like a tornado. There is a thermal inversion here. I bet there is. I bet you that the surface of Jupiter will give a very high infrared count. Reading. Hal reading inaudible sentence. And it says the heat is held down. So I guess Hal was trying to confirm a couple things while he was doing his remote viewing. But unfortunately it was inaudible. So that would have been useful to see what Hal had to say about that. But he goes on to say, I seem to be stuck, not moving. I'll move more towards the equator. I get the impression that there must be a band of crystals similar to the outer ones, kind of bluish. I seem to be a sort of in orbit, permanent orbit, down through another layer further down, which are like our clouds, but moving fast. They're another area, liquid like water. It looks like it's got icebergs, but if they're not icebergs, but they're not icebergs. He says a tremendous wind. It's colder here. Maybe it's because there's not a thermal inversion there. And then at 6:23, he says, I'm back. Okay. The atmosphere of Jupiter is very thick. I mean, Inigo draws, and he explains that he does a little drawing of what he thinks the atmosphere is looking like. And this goes on to explain the drawing. And this is what appears to be a hydrogen mantle that is about 100,000 miles off of the surface. And there are bands of crystal kind of elements. They're pretty close to the surface, and beneath those are layers of clouds, or what they seem to be prevailing winds. And beneath that and then you have a giant splotch that they decided to remove. So let's see. It looked like there were shifting sands. It got a lot of slippery granulated stuff. And it says that east was very high mountain chain. He says about 30,000 feet. And he feels like these crystals will probably bounce radio waves. They're that type. And he says, generally, that's all. So that was in Ingo's recount of his mission to Jupiter and what he saw. Now, I want to point out that there are a few things that I think they're both seeing, which I find really interesting. And this is where I think we open up the conversation a little bit. would be strange to me, and I want to get your guys' input. Do you think that there is outside influence or some sort of collusion? Or do you think that it's possible that we are able to tap into these things to see something similar? I mean to say that both of these people, admittedly, and even in this document, one of them says that they don't have any experience with Jupiter or space or the mechanics of, a planetary body. And yet they're still both seeing similar things that we later find out are quite accurate. So my question is, what's going on here? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. Because I think not fully knowing like what's true and what's not true in terms of like let's going through Jupiter's characteristics and stuff. It is interesting that there's some similarities in what they're talking about. But then again, it's like if you were to imagine a planet in the future, how many elements, like I'm just thinking probabilistically, like where would you go? Well, I don't know. I'd have to kind of like research more about what we knew. I don't know. It's weird. I think I just don't know. I don't know what to make of this.
I'm gonna ask, pick a number, 0 or 1.
0.5.
Ah,
No, I don't know. 0.
okay. Have you ever seen a movie called Suspect Zero?
No, I don't think so.
I think it came out in the early to mid 2000s, starring Ben Kingsley, Trinity, forgive me for not remembering her name, and Two-Face, Aaron Eckhart.
Mm-hmm.
And it centers around remote viewing. And Ben Kingsley is a guy who was in the remote viewing project, but then was kicked out, but still does it to track down serial killers and kill them.
Okay.
So I saw that when I was a kid, and I got really interested into remote viewing, and I find it interesting that these two separate people had very close similarities, and it seems like remote viewing, even when I tried it, it's something that anybody can do. They've even on the DVD and the behind the scenes sort of stuff, they did a test too with like random people. And they found that pretty much anybody can remote view in some elementary sense. And so, yeah, I mean, it all sort of makes sense too from like, have you ever like been driving down the road? Like, it's not really conditioned either, but like flash your lights at somebody when they don't have their headlights on and they turn on their headlights.
Yeah.
Early on when you're young, that's not like a conditioned thing. You just sort of know. So there's, or like been thinking of somebody and they sent you a text message or sent you a phone call. You start to build on like a collective unconscious. So it makes sense where there would be similarity, and some people may just be gifted in projecting themselves, quote unquote, into locations and taking a view. Like, yeah. And it doesn't, it might be a sixth sense born out of survival necessity, like say hunting, like you want to pick up on intuitions of other people in your hunting party or something like that. So,
or even the ability to feel other life forms would probably be very useful for a hunter. And I think that sort of perception to feel other presences is probably parallel to this sort of fifth dimensional exploration thing.
Exactly. And it makes sense to me where these two people from different states could view the same thing, and even like holding the heat down, again, high pressure, a gas giant such as Jupiter. It all makes sense. I think it's it's not as crazy as we think it is. I think it's something we do subconsciously all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you're right. We talk about this concept of flow state as well, or at least it's a very trendy concept for all of those type A go-getters out there. But like this concept of flow state is being able to tap into that sort of cosmic energy flow in order to get a task done effectively and as easily as possible. And so I think there's definitely states that we are able to get to, and perhaps we're not able to harness it all the time, but there are situations in which we all experience these sort of states, and perhaps these experiments that they were doing were in sort of an attempt to find the formula that is able to harness this stuff and actually utilize it, instead of it being just like divine inspiration of being able to just shoot yourself out there and then retrieve stuff, which seems to me a very human way to go about being able to tap into the cosmic energy. It's not like we're just like, oh yeah, so there's this thing that you can tap into when you're really inspired and when you're really connected to the present and you're really connected to all of the things that make you joyous and happy or sad or whatever you're feeling, those emotions. And then they're like, okay, how do we make it into a weapon? Like how do we tap that resource and then make sure that we can use it on our enemies?
I mean, it seems logical, right?
Yeah, I guess so. You want to have the upper hand.
I mean, why not? If other places are doing
fair enough. That's
why
fair enough.
wouldn't we do it?
Correct. That is true. Yeah. But so I wanted to talk with you guys about the similarities, and then we're going to go through a couple of the things that I think are proofs. Now I have one solid proof, and then I have a one or two tangential sort of mentions that are in this remote viewing that are true to what the what comprises Jupiter, but I could not verify whether that was at all common knowledge prior to this era. So I was trying to figure out whether specifically the hydrogen mantle is something that's mentioned, which is actually true of Jupiter. Jupiter does have a hydrogen core, and it's very hot, and it looks like a liquid, but it's 10 million degrees or something like that. But I wasn't able to verify whether that was common knowledge prior to this experiment. So I don't know if that's an actual proof, but it is interesting because somebody without any knowledge of, the way, celestial mechanics works and astrophysics wouldn't necessarily, you can pull hydrogen as the most abundant element, but having like a molten hydrogen core is pretty descriptive, at least I think. All right, so let's get into the similarities, and they were so nice as to tabulate these for us. And this is between Harold Sherman and Ingo Swann, and the similarities are as follows. So number one, the atmosphere. Both of them said that there were crystals that looked like diamonds and gave off a sparkle. They both also said that there was a distinct golden or yellow hue to the atmosphere, and that there were a myriad of different colors: reds, ultraviolets, some greens, cloud layers. So this layering of multicolored gases. And they said of the surface that both of them saw this sort of reddish, burnt brown formation. One said that it was more like sand. One more said it was like molten lava almost. They both said that there seems to be huge volcanoes or mountains. That I could not corroborate because we don't know if there are any mountains on Jupiter. But he says that they both said that there was a metallic molten sparks that were red hot, and the surface with Jupiter will give off a high infrared count. So both of them mentioned that the surface of Jupiter, the core, would be incredibly hot, which it is. Again, somewhere to the magnitude of, I don't even know, I think it was 10 million degrees, to be honest. Very, very hot. Maybe not that hot because I don't know how much the sun is, but it's very hot.
It's not that bad. It's at 100 million.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's only 10 million. They both said of the other surface characteristics, the ice crystals, and they both talked about swirling vortexes, which is interesting because they said one said there was a tornado, the other said it was vortices. What's interesting about Jupiter is that it actually has vortices, and that's the technical name for them. Jupiter has thousands of these vortexes in the form of cyclones, and then something called an anticyclone, which I did not know existed, but apparently exists. I believe that's where the pressure is going in the other direction. So you have a cyclone that's actually going upward instead of downward, which I guess is kind of terrifying.
It's like a toilet spinning in the opposite direction when you
Yeah.
flush it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So apparently Jupiter has something like that with its cyclones, where it's like some go downward towards the core and then others will go out into the atmosphere.
That's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
I mean, it looks like a good base planet for, further space exploration.
For jumping, yeah, totally. Well, and it would also explain this sort of concept that Ayla was reading about, this, like, how he saw the moons that were sort of like being spit out into orbit and then collecting, and that was one of the other proofs that I had for you guys, where he talks about seeing 17 moons. Now at the time, and I was able to verify this, it was understood that Jupiter had 11 moons. We only knew that Jupiter had 11 moons for sure. This astral projection project claimed that there were 17. Well, that's not exactly true either. There are actually 56. There are 56 moons, but that is to say that they predicted that there were 6 more that scientists would find, and they were technically right about that.
And
and
there was probably only 17 from where his position could see them. Maybe.
Yeah, even that, absolutely. But I do think that it's interesting that before this, the common knowledge was that Jupiter had 11 moons, and these people said 17. We now know that Jupiter has something around 56 moons. So that's just another tiny little proof for you guys. They also said about, let's see, the mention of water and liquid. So there was a lot of mentioning of water and liquid in both of these, and they were really trying to drill into this. And then in the conversation they had on the telephone, which I'm not going to read to you guys because it gets a little bit long and it's just very mundane, they did point out, and they had this conversation about making the distinction of whether they saw water or they saw liquid. And they both said that they saw water, but it wasn't necessarily in liquid form. What we've now know is that Jupiter has actually a reasonable amount of water within its atmosphere. That's something that we didn't know until the Pioneer 10 probe and until further experimentation and research on its atmosphere. We didn't actually know that there was water within the atmosphere. So that's another little thing that both of them mentioned that we wouldn't have had prior knowledge about. Let's see. And a couple of the differences they explain as well. But that's not as important, to be honest. But yes, I wanted to get into, here we go. The one that I think is most impressive is the crystals and the raining of crystals on Jupiter. And I say that because that is something you just cannot know unless you're there. And it's certainly not something you can know in 1973, because this BBC article from 2013 was one of the cutting pun diamonds, was one of the cutting edge sort of announcements about what the status or the current conditions were on Saturn and Jupiter. And apparently it rains diamonds on Saturn and Jupiter. And this is something that we found out in 2013. And I will again say that these two men said that the atmosphere of Jupiter was raining crystals or diamonds in 1973. Now, I don't know exactly what that means. Maybe you guys have some opinions on that, but I'm a little bit stumped as to how you could even make that up in your head if you had no prior knowledge to it. What do you guys think? Because that to me is like the biggest proof, because you could speculate about knowing about the red storm. You could speculate about knowing that the hydrogen mantle existed because hydrogen's the most abundant element in the universe. So you can just say, well, it must be made of hydrogen. That's a safe bet. You could talk about the the vortexes and the storms, because we do know that astronomers knew about the red dot in the 1600s. You could talk about the possibility of liquid water, that, like it could be speculated that because there's so many gases that perhaps H2O is in the atmosphere as well. But to me, the raining of crystals and diamonds is just not something that you can make up. And that's, to me, is really where this experiment, the rubber meets the road.
Aliens from Jupiter came
Aliens from Jupiter.
They told us. No. So from the point of like the Star Wars defense, I mean, maybe we just reached space far before we had more advanced technology. I'm just trying to find an argument against this.
Mhm.
But maybe we had more advanced technology than we let the public know about, and had a poor satellite get obliterated by this diamond rain, and then these reports came out knowing that X amount of years later there would be research to prove it proper.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I mean,
even that's a stretch, though.
Yeah, and it would seem strange to me that before even the first probe to meet Jupiter, and I mean, take pictures of it millions of miles away, and then to pass by it, that would have been the only time that we could actually have a decent look at Jupiter's atmosphere. And before that, we were only looking through telescopes. So to make
Publicly, though.
What's that? Publicly, yes, that's true. Maybe they knew, but then that would mean that these individuals that are remote viewing were privy to that knowledge. No?
Yeah, like they had notes from internal government sources, or maybe these people obviously exist, but maybe they were paid and co-opted into whatever.
Yeah.
But like again, we're getting like real conspiracy.
Yeah. And it seems like that would be such a strange conspiracy. Be like, all right, we're going to pay these two psychics to do remote viewing to tell us that it's raining diamonds on Jupiter, so that in 2013, 40 years later, we can proclaim it on a website.
Yeah, but we ruined the Soviet economy.
Yes. That's right. We did. We tanked the Soviet economy. Yeah, totally. Ayla, what do you think? I mean, like, as I said, to me, this seems like the biggest enigma. I mean, only because this is a proof that there was no prior knowledge, at least from what we can tell publicly. There was no prior knowledge of this.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a curious thing, and I think it's something that bears more investigatory initiatives. Because do you know when the Pioneer 10 finally landed and reported data back to us?
Yes, so the Pioneer 10 was launched the same year that this took place. It was so it was first launched in 1972 in March, and then between July 1972 and February 1973, it became the first spacecraft to traverse the asteroid belt, and then it started taking photography of Jupiter in November 1973. So this would have been, it took photography, what?
Like a year later?
No, 6 months later, 7 months later.
That's crazy. We were able to send something to Jupiter.
Yeah.
And it got there 6 months later.
Yeah. So it was launched in 1972, and it got to Jupiter in 1973. It was more than a year. But yes, yeah, it was about 14, 16 months.
Right. Okay. And sorry to probe on that. I just was.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to say it was only about 7 months that this experiment took place before the Pioneer got to Jupiter.
Mm-hmm. Right. No, I guess what I'm trying to think about is, if it's basically these two guys have this remote viewing, and less than a year later are proven correct. But then the whole project just kind of fizzles out. That's a little weird to me. I would think that would be something that you're like, oh, wow, this is really fascinating. Let's dump some more money into it and do
Oh,
some more
don't.
studies.
Oh, yeah. Well, don't get it twisted. This SRI experiments on remote viewing continue. This is just one chapter of the book.
Well, yeah, no, I read some of that. I'm just saying though, like, where is it today? What happened?
Oh, yeah.
And I think like where I would say there would be cause to stop is the utility function. Because with any kind of emerging science, right, the goal is to have some sort of predictability that you can bank on, like
Mhm.
if we train
Yes.
these people to remote view, we can probably say 9 times out of 10 we're going to get accurate information. And
Mhm.
so I'd be interested to look at the statistics on maybe some of the more mundane, easier
Well,
to observe kind of stuff. Because it's just fascinating. I think that it hinges on like consciousness and unexplored potentiality that many of us are probably still to this day interested in, but like who's studying it? So
in
Mhm.
a probabilistic space, you don't even need that high. You don't need 90%.
yeah, that's
You
true too.
just want to do something better than what a random guess can get you.
Mhm.
Hmm.
As long as you can do something better than that, then it's worth um, investigating. And near the end,
Right.
I mean, like I've experimented with remote viewing and can kind of get into that near the end because I tend to be a very visual person when I think, and I think that helps. Um, but I wouldn't be able to give you any proofs. You just might. There's steps in meditation that you can do, but you just might end up just imagining a space. But it's at least worth talking about. I think how the common person can attempt to remote view.
Yes, I
Hmm.
agree. And I think that there are many, I think a future episode will be a practices of reaching the fifth dimension because I believe this episode ties in with Mike's previous episode, which if you haven't listened to is very good. Go back and listen to that one. But we talked about the fifth dimension and, we've had talks about dreams before. We've had talks about the gateway experience. And I think all of this is kind of culminating into a recognition that man has a potential in us and humans have a potential to tap into higher dimensions. And so it would definitely be a good episode, I think, in the future for us to talk about methods in which to increase your probability of tapping into that higher dimension.
Most def. And
Hmm.
it's a muscle. Like your brain's a muscle, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can't hope for um, immediate success unless you're talented. But
Right.
if you repeat the steps through hard work, you can start to get inklings. I mean, it starts with meditation, just
Mm.
basic meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are even people like Wim Hof. I'm sure you guys know who he is. He's the
Iceman.
yes, the Iceman. He's the Scandinavian man that has adopted a breathing technique that allows him to swim underneath polar ice caps. He's done marathons on the North and South Pole. He climbed Mount Everest with no shirt on, um,
And
and he
shorts.
and shorts. And he did all of this with just doing breathing techniques. And so this ability. And I was listening to a podcast where they were mentioning him, and they had talked about how his breathing technique is somehow um, creating a relationship with the Planck constant and being able to vibrate the cellular level to that Planck constant that Ayla we've talked about in the gateway
Hmm.
experience before, which is really the key to click into that next level of perception. And so something about Wim Hof's breathing technique is helping him his brain get to that level, which I find really fascinating because that would, like Mike said, that would sort of tie into the concept that meditation itself, because it focuses so much on breathing, is an entryway into this sort of heightened perception.
Because the Planck's constant is always changing. You have to chase it as well. It's
Mm,
also another
hmm
thing in meditation is chasing the center point.
mm. Yeah, very fair. Yeah. Well, yeah. And so before we wrap up, there was something that I found in this document that I thought was really beautiful. And it was a comment made by Harold, I believe. He said something in this when they're having the conversation, they're kind of debriefing on what they believe, like what they, reported to each other. And Harold makes a statement that he wrote prior to the remote viewing session. And it was sort of like a disclaimer statement that he made. But I think that there's a really beautiful sentiment somewhere in it. If I can find the effing piece of paper, I always do this. Why does it do this? Okay, here we go.
You're using paper?
I know I am using paper. What an archaic way. And so this was Harold Sherman's statement that he wanted to write down and release for the record prior to his remote viewing. He said, "I would like to state before starting this test that while I've always been interested in the cosmos and man's relationship to it, I have never had any occasion to study astronomy, nor am I versed in physics, chemistry, and the only general information I have about Jupiter is that it's the largest planet and it has supposedly 11 moons or satellites and is perhaps one of the most brilliant of heavenly bodies. This in itself may be suggestive, but I have found that the less I can consciously know about a locality or a person, the more certain I am of the validity or accuracy of any impressions that may come to me. Whether I receive impressions in the attempted mental probe of Jupiter in the form of visual images or perceptual feelings or both, I cannot say of the test, but I will record in writing as nearly as I can to convert into words the things that come through, if anything. My method is simple: to make myself unself-conscious of my physical surroundings, to fix my conscious mind attention on the objective at whatever seeming distance, and let myself wonder what exists at that point. I have found that wonder is the key word for me. It frees my imagination from trying to guess or embroider whatever impression I may be receiving, so long as I can maintain this fixation of attention. Apparently, some faculty of mine makes contact instantly, unlimited by time or space, with the area it is directed to concentrate upon. If it is possible to hold the mind's attention on the locale or person once contact is made for more than a split second of initial contact, then a state of awareness could be retained long enough to bring back reliable data of what may exist at that point, even including the reactionary feelings engendered in the sensitive during the contextual experience. And this is the tidbit I really wanted to hit home on. He goes on to say in conclusion, who knows if the science fiction writers who have been imaginatively creating, as they think, fantastic ideas of other planets and civilizations, past, present, or future, may instead have been physically tuning in on actual conditions from the higher sources, coloring them somewhat with their own creativity, but basically producing facts often latter substantiated by scientific discoveries or by actual Earth developments. This is an area of the mind well worth extensive study and experimentation. And I just thought that was a really nice paragraph and recap of kind of the essence of what I believe this podcast touches on, or at least I would like it to touch on, and that's the concept of who knows if the science fiction writers who have been imaginatively creative as they think, thinking fantastic ideas of other planets and civilizations of past, present, and future, who may instead have been psychically tuning in on actual conditions from higher source or sources.
Yeah, it's good. I wouldn't be shocked.
Well, and it just kind of reminds me too of the Einstein quote, right? Imagination is everything. we talk about it, and Ayla's been on a Star Trek kick, right? How many of the inventions in Star Trek have come to reality because somebody imagined them?
Yeah.
And I think that what's really important, and the intro to this show will remind you every time that just because something is science fiction doesn't mean that it will remain science fiction. And sometimes our imaginations are pulling from true places.
Like, even go back to A Trip to the Moon, the first sci-fi film. There was like a cannon that shot a bunch of people to the moon.
Mm.
It's not
Yeah.
too far from what we actually do.
Not at all. Not at all. We just we throw the cannon too.
Yeah,
We just put the people in the cannon, then shoot the cannon.
right. Like even Dick Tracy talking to his watch.
Yep. Definitely. Yeah.
Well, and I think, to kind of counter my counterpoint earlier about prediction and probability and stuff, um, because I think what you're talking about, Nick, is just the importance of creativity and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps just openness to be able to kind of think about things in new ways. And
Yes.
I think what we're trying to kind of notice is that that's a necessary thing, especially because, if you're fixated on the truth, which exists in a closed system, you've heard me say this many times, well, that system can still exist in another system. And I think
Mm.
that, like, humans are on the precipice of extraordinary times where we can go further into space. Our technology is rapidly changing. And so you're seeing that bubble get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that there's a point at which, and it's weird because I'm getting total deja vu as I'm talking about this, but I think there's a point where creativity is necessary to get us from point A to point B, from one circle of truth to a newer circle of truth. And what's weird is that this is a concept that goes as far back as like Socrates, or what is it, Plato's cave,
Mm-hmm.
and those shadows on the wall. And I find it really weird, like a kind of weird solipsis or circular kind of snake eating its tail kind of thing when you think about that, about how something so far in the past can still be so relevant today.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and I
it's
think,
and so critical too. I mean, the
yeah.
line that really stood out for me from what the hell is his name? Harold Sherman. He says, "I have found that wonder is the key word for me. It frees my imagination from trying to guess or embroider whatever impressions I may be receiving."
Hmm.
And I think that that's really the crux of what I would like, this show. And I think that that's kind of what we've done is just allow a place for wonder, because we're not going to get everything right. I'm sure I've gotten a million things wrong in just this episode, but I still had a really great conversation with you guys, and I had a really good time because, it's that wonder, it's that openness to possibility, that I think that helps us triumph over time.
It's true. And I'm reminded of um, what I think we had to talk about, like black holes or something like that. And or it was the Hubble constant, and it was Einstein, and he wrote his friend, and his friend wrote back, and he said, what a great thing for me to swim for a moment in the sea of your ideas."
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote that from the trenches of World War one of
Yeah,
them.
World War One, probably.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I mean, I think you're exactly right. Like curiosity and wonderment, to hold those close, and creativity. I think, yeah, it's totally what this show is about. I'm getting misty eyed. We're coming up on a year here.
I know. Yeah, that's true. That's true. We'll have to do a huge blowout for our anniversary.
Yay!
But yeah, that's all I got for you guys this evening. Do you have anything you want to say before we wrap up? Anything you want to add?
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nick.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Well, I appreciate you guys listening. We thank you very much for taking the time this Friday evening to go on that astral projection journey with us. We hope that you enjoyed. There's a ton more documentation that I'm going to be doing. And trust me, I will make sure that I know these inside and out so I don't have to read anymore. I can just recant you with the tales. But there are plenty of documents that I want to share with you guys in the future. They're all about this astral projection program that happened. And they're all very fascinating. And they'll continue our conversation about the ability to perceive higher than our five senses can. And, exercises along the way to get us there. But until then, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Ayla. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you guys always. Please consider giving us a follow and a subscription on YouTube. We would very much appreciate it. Other than that, you stay out there, Cognonauts, and we will catch you on the next Exofathom. Good night.
Peace.
Later.